Well, I'm delighted to be here with you this afternoon to introduce the final capstone session on shifting typologies of the sacred site. My name is Marcia Inhorn, and I'm the chair of the Council on Middle East Studies here at Yale University. I'm also a professor of anthropology and international affairs, and I would very much like to begin this final session, this final afternoon of the conference, with a few notes of thanks and a few thoughts about the importance of this conference for Yale, for the Council on Middle East Studies at Yale, and most important, for the current historical moment in which we live. First, I want to thank the School of Architecture here at Yale with Dean Robert Stern and particularly my colleague Carla Britton. Carla has really been the major force in Yale's Council on Middle East Studies, not only through her participation on our executive board, but also through her major interdisciplinary efforts to bring together three of the professional schools at Yale, namely architecture, divinity, and the Whitney and Betty Macmillan Center for International and Area Studies, where our Council on Middle East Studies is based. Carla's efforts to bring together three disparate fields, namely architecture, religious studies, and Middle East studies, is, I believe, a fine representation of the wave of the future in new millennial academia. We can no longer remain pigeonholed in our disparate disciplinary ivory towers. We need to reach beyond disciplinary boundaries within our own universities and within academia more broadly. Such a cross-fertilization of disciplinary perspectives is, I believe, producing some of the most exciting scholarship in the new millennium. And this is the kind of work that our Council on Middle East Studies wants to support. Indeed, the mission of the Council on Middle East Studies is not only to produce future Middle East scholars and linguists, but to make sure that exciting work in Middle East studies is being done across the university, including through professional schools such as architecture. Thus, this very interdisciplinary conference, focusing simultaneously on architecture, religion, spirituality, divinity, urban studies, urban planning, Middle East studies, international and area studies, is really the quintessential example of our mission at the Yale Council of Middle East Studies. And so for all of your efforts, Carla, in organizing this really remarkable cross-fertilizing event, we thank you from the bottoms of our heart. I also want to comment on the timeliness of this particular conference and its focus on the Middle East. First, from the perspective of Yale. Like many other universities in North America, Yale is in the process of globalization. 16% of Yale undergraduates now come from other countries, including the nations of the Middle East. Yale hosts a major World Fellows program, which brings young leaders from around the world, including the Middle East, each fall. This fall, we had Yale World Fellows coming from Afghanistan, Lebanon, and Tunisia. Yale has developed a new global health initiative, which will have its own conference here on Friday, February 11th. One of the major thematics of that initiative is health and conflict in the Middle East. Indeed, the Middle East is now one of the top 5 strategic priority areas for Yale in terms of its globalization, internationalization efforts. To that end, in the past 4 years, Yale has hired more than a dozen Middle East Studies faculty across the university in the fields of American studies, anthropology, comparative literature, economics, history, nursing, political science, and sociology. As the chair of the Council on Middle East Studies, I feel very fortunate to be at a university that is seriously investing in contemporary Middle East studies, including in our School of Architecture. Second, I want to say something about the very timeliness of this conference theme, Middle Ground, Middle East, religious sites in urban contexts. In the new millennium, the Middle East is the site of so much ferment that is both positive and negative. On the positive side, as you've heard in the presentations to this point, first, urban architectural wonders are blossoming all over the Middle East, not only in the architectural hotspots of Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Doha, and other Arab Gulf cities, but also in urban centers across the region, including North Africa and the Levant. Middle Eastern architects, such as Zaha Hadid, who's been a visiting professor here at the Yale School of Architecture many times, are literally changing the skylines of the urban Middle East with their remarkable buildings. This includes the construction of beautiful new mosques and religious centers in cities across the Middle East. And so in my view, architecture is truly one of the most exciting areas of emergence, that which is both novel and experimental in the region today. Second, a second positive is the burgeoning scholarship on Middle Eastern architecture and urbanism. Architectural historians such as Nizar Essayed, who is also the director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of California, Berkeley, as well as a practicing architect, are reminding us of the importance of the Middle East's grand architectural past and city planning. A number of Middle East scholars have also taken on the Middle East colonial past and the ways in which Britain, France, and Libya have literally reshaped the cityscapes of the region. In the most contemporary terms, there has been an incredible profusion of anthropological and human geographical scholarship on contemporary urban spaces, including spaces of memory, places of religious and political pilgrimage, new development towns, neighborhoods of resettlement, including rural to urban migrants, and forced migrants and refugees. Indeed, in my own discipline of anthropology, there has been a proliferation of studies on urban refugee camps and places of forced migration. These scholars are showing how human population movements are literally reshaping urban forms. In addition, urban restoration and renovation projects are underway throughout the Middle East, including efforts to preserve religious sites and to restore war-torn cities. Nowhere is this effort more visible or impressive than in Beirut, Lebanon, where the once devastated city center has been literally reborn, including through the rebuilding of a number of mosques, churches, war memorials, and we hope in the future, the preservation of some of the still standing synagogues. The best examples of urban synagogue renewal in the Arab world, in my mind, may be found in Morocco, where King Mohammed VI is attempting to recapture the multi-religious and multi-ethnic history of his country, including its Jewish and Berber minority populations. Fourth, despite the ongoing wars in places like Iraq, populations are returning to holy pilgrimage centers in cities like Karbala and Najaf. The rehabilitation of old sacred sites in once war-torn areas and the development of entirely new sacred sites is one of the most interesting contemporary phenomena in the Middle East today. Indeed, on a recent trip to architecturally magnificent Turkey, I learned of a new Kurdish pilgrimage center that has grown up and around the ancestral birthplace of the founder of the Kurdish resistance movement. On the negative side, there is much trouble in the Middle East. Indeed, at the very same conference, the young scholar who presented the paper on this Kurdish pilgrimage center was publicly renounced by the Turkish conference organizers for presenting a paper on the Kurds. This is but one example of the many political tensions present in the Middle East today. There are other notable examples that bear mentioning here. First, urban infrastructures and religious sites are decaying in many of the cities around the Middle Eastern region for lack of resources, government investment, and the problems of political violence. Sometimes government investments in urban renewal are quite poorly executed, causing more damage to ancient structures than good. Second, wars have devastated urban centers such as Baghdad, Kabul, and Beirut, including some of the most magnificent holy sites in those cities. Beirut, a city in which I have lived and loved, is a war-torn beauty with bullet-pocked, shell-shocked, bomb-pocked structures still dotting the urban landscape. Most troubling, much of the recent political violence in the region has specifically targeted holy sites, with the destruction of the sites themselves and the killing of many innocents during moments of worship. Iraq's sad 60-year history of repression and political violence has been further marred in the new millennium with this type of religious site targeting and destruction. Deliberate destruction of mosques, churches, synagogues, museums, and ancient wonders of the world is one of the saddest legacies of the violence that still rocks the region, from Algeria in the west to Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan in the east. I would like to end on a positive note, however, by saying that I personally remain hopeful for the region, where repressive regimes can be toppled, such as in Tunisia, where the younger generation in most Middle Eastern countries is embracing education and the internet, and where hopes for a peaceful and prosperous Middle East future are in fact the hopes of the majority. I have just finished writing a book called Reconceiving Middle Eastern Manhood, Islam, Assisted Reproduction, and Emergent Masculinities, which will be published by Princeton University Press this fall. The theme of my book is emergence, all that is exciting, new, and hopeful in the Middle Eastern region, including the emergent masculinities of Middle Eastern men, who are far different in most cases from the damning portrayals we see regularly in the Western media. Indeed, the Middle East is a region full of rich history and incredible sacred architecture, but also much that is new, architecturally, religiously, and socially speaking. This conference brings together these exciting developments in ways that are uniquely challenging. And so again, I am most grateful to Carla Britton for her vision in this regard. So now my role here is to say a few words about our distinguished presenters in this final session of the conference, which is called Shifting Typologies of the Sacred Site. And I will begin with Mr. Massimiliano Fuksas. Let me just introduce all three of you first, and then I'll have you come up to the front. Yes, you have many nice things I want to say about you. Okay. Massimiliano Fuksas, of Lithuanian background, was born in Rome, where he received his degree in architecture from La Sapienza University. After opening his first architecture office in Rome, he's opened subsequent offices in Paris, Vienna, Frankfurt, and most recently, Shenzhen, China. He has also been a member of the urban commissions of both Berlin and Salzburg. In 2000, Mr. Fuksas was the director of the Venice Biennale's 7th International Architecture Exhibition called Less Aesthetics, More Ethics. For many years, he has dedicated special attention to the study of urban problems, and in particular, the problems of the suburbs in large metropolitan areas. Mr. Fuksas has been a visiting professor at many universities in both Europe and America, including the École Spéciale d'Architecture in Paris and Columbia University in New York. He has also won many architectural awards, a list of which is so long that I really can't begin to read it, but I will mention the two most recent prizes, the Campari Red Passion Prize in 2010 and the Gold Medal Award for the Zenith Music Hall in Strasbourg, France in 2009. And so today, Mr. Fuksas makes his home in two of the world's most beautiful cities, Rome and Paris, two of my favorites, and he will be speaking to us about a different city. He's going to be speaking about the Perez Peace House in Jaffa, Israel. And so you can come in here, and we can clap for you. How's that? Thank you. Should I introduce the other two, or would you like to go forward? Okay, great. Then you can do your part, and I will come back. So I think we need to shift them. You can keep that on. Do you have your own? Okay, thank you. Everybody walk. Okay, great.
Thank you very much. What I should do, I think, is to speak about what is a site. What is the site in which the destiny bring me a few years ago, quite 10 years ago. I tell you something, that there is a place in the world that is, the name is Jaffa, or Jaffo, or Jaffo, or Joppo, like the Bible learn the way in which we have to call it to understand, is Tel Aviv. Jaffa is the Arab quartier of Tel Aviv. It's 65% of Arabs and less of Jewish. What is this place? This is the oldest harbor in the world, 4,000 years ago. Phoenician, before Phoenician was Canaanian. It's a place very strange that my site, I call it in this way, it was really closed with the legend. The legend is the mythology of Andromeda. Andromeda, she was beautiful. And the mother, she was proud, and she said always that she was the beautiful woman and child in the world. And then in the Reidi, that used to be the beautiful in the mythology, they were very aggressive. They didn't want it. They asked to Jove and after to Poseidon to punish the father, that was Cepheo, and the mother, Calliope, for that. And then what happened that a big dragon arrived. It did a destruction of all the area. And the father asked to Jupiter, Zeus, please, save us. He said, you can do this. We can do, but you have to sacrifice your daughter. You bring the daughter in one rock, just in front of Jaffa. This young lady will be eat, or I don't know really what, by the dragon. And Perseus arrived, Perseus, and give the freedom, and after he married Andromeda. Then you see the history of this place is very, this is the right, this one, this after, no, this one, okay. The history of Andromeda, Perseus, of Jaffa, this act in Jaffa is, was with the Greeks. What is this? No, it's not this. Yeah, what after? In the Middle Age? No, okay, no, there is a bit. With Veronese, take a lot of time. It doesn't work. I can say next, it's more easy. Okay, okay. Rubens, Doré, and this is the place. Next. Then one day, Shimon Peretz was in the springtime of '99. He called me, he said, why cannot we do together a project? A project of what? A peace center. We have a foundation that we call Paris Foundation for Peace or something like this. We can do the House of the Peace, Paris House of Peace. Then I said, yes, but we have, you have the money to do it? He said, no, we have no money. But we have a program, we can do a program. And we have the land, no, we have no land. And after we try to be, before, we wanted to work with the Palestinian, because it was a place common to people, Israel and the Palestinian. And he said, we can involve Mr. Arafat with this. And before to arrive here in Jaffa, next. This is a flashback now. We asked to Arafat to work together, was a very good relationship in '99, was after Oslo, good agreement. Arafat asked me to have a lunch in Ramallah. I went there, and this place was not for us. We wanted to build this in the area of Palestine, in the West Bank, but it was very difficult. Why? Because it is even a square meters in Palestine or in Israel is very important. Then I discovered how much is important the land, the site. You see, in this area that was not in our mind before, in the down, you see this area is old Arab, Islamic and Arab cemetery. This area was beautiful, but was not in our mind. Next. Shimon Peres said me, can you do a concept? I will meet you in Florence in 3 days. And in 3 days, we did a model of something that is, this was the first idea, was the layers with the concrete or perhaps stones. So we have no idea of which material. And between, I think that it was nice to do some glass. Water stratification was something that very close with the people. Next. Then we worked. I was more young, and Shimon too. He was very young, not very, but now he's 86 years old. I met in December. Next. And then I met Arafat. Arafat asked me before I met him if I could do another project for him. But he was involved in this project that was the Peace Center. And he said, why we cannot do a piazza or a stairways that he called the stairways to the star. I did the sketch. I did a painting, something like this, and I met Arafat. We start to speak about Peres Center. Everything was fantastic. And after we start to speak about this. And invite me to have lunch. He was sick. And they saw that he was sick. Was a only man lunch, but there was only one woman. The woman was Anna Arashavi. That was the most clever, perhaps, in the Arab and the Palestinian government. Next. Then we try to do a model, and in Venice, of next, of what could be this. We did a big model in Venice. Next. Some details. Next. And after 6 years ago, Shimon Peres was 80 years old. He did a big convention with Mr. Clinton, Mr. Gorbachev, and so on. And we decided to do the cornerstone, the first stone of this building. But what happened before? That the relationship between Palestinian and Israel was not the same before. Then he decided, all together, to come back in Israel land. And one evening, in the summertime, Shimon Peres called me and said, I have found the best area in the world, in Jaffa, or Yaffo. And he said to me, come here, please, soon as possible. You will cry when you see this area. Then this was the land in which we could work. Next. And this was the area. You see this is Jaffa, this Arab. You see here the Arab cemetery. We started to build here. And this is a fantastic restaurant, Arab restaurant. Oh, thank you, fantastic. Bravissimo. This is Arab restaurant. And this is the site in which Andromeda was free from the dragon. Then there is a site. The site is a history, but I have no idea about Andromeda Perseus when we started the project. Even Shimon Peres had no idea. Next. Then we start to dig. This was there, and that was very important for us, the relationship with the ship, with the sea. Next. Next. You see that this building is, for 3 sides, is absolutely closed. But there is only one, is in the south, next, in the west, sorry. In the west, that you see the water. And what we did with the first model, the first kitchen, is exactly the same after 10 years. And what happened in my time? Happened that this is east and this is west. I could not imagine that it was really the orientation of something that was a church or a place that was important for our history, in the Mediterranean history. Next. Then the project was something like this. It was an idea to give, like Pessoa said in one fantastic book, a place for the sailors that lost the ships. You can give to them some place to live. You see what was my idea, to give through this the light. And after parents said me, we have to do this green. We did this green. Why? Because he loved one project of mine that I did in 86, 87 perhaps in Bordeaux, that was a building with oxidated copper. He wanted this exactly the color. And they said, no, it's impossible. We can use only concrete. And he still, now he said, why we did not this building in a copper? He said it was too much expensive. Next. You can understand very well. You are architects, so you see what is the corner. Okay, next. 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 Inside is absolutely different. What you don't see outside, what is the very quiet, with this imagination of different and chaotic layers. But we use 12 different beams with different sides. Next. Yes, inside is this. There is not correspondence between outside and inside. Inside is dramatic, is something that you feel that something happened in this area, in our history, in this period too. Next. And in this building live together Palestinian and Israeli for cooperation, doing some project for young guys, for the sports, for school, education, and economy. There is not a democracy without economy. Next. Next. Then the light is a filter light. We use a lot of light, but this light it was manipulated by me, by Doriana too. Next. Next. Then there is a piece of this building in which you understand quite all the logic of this project and the concept. Here there are all the collection of all the documents of the Prix Nobel, Shimon Peres, and his friends. Their friends too. Next. Next. Yeah, you can see this, like the most dramatic place in this building. When you go on in this building, you have always some different point of view. It's like our life, it's the concept that there are so many people, there are different point of view, also different concepts, ideas, mentality, religion. Then you have to find a place in which you accept the confrontation, dialogue. Next. This is Doriana. Next. And then you discover the sea. The sea, you are waiting for sailors, people without a country. There are no more a country in a lot of places in the world. You can accept these people. can accept all the people that are looking for something. Next. And the best of this project, the director of this place, Ron Pundak, he sent me a letter. He said, "It's the first time that I am sitting in my office. Thank you very much." And this is the best that I had in my life. Because they are not clients. There are no clients in this project. There are no fees. There are nothing. It was all donors. There are no government that they give to us some money. There are donors, a lot of American donors. There are people that are involved in the concept of peace. The crazy people that are thinking that it's possible to have a peaceful country, a peaceful world. Next. And the hall, the conference hall, you can see through the cemetery. You can see next. Even the scenario is not me, it's not us, but it's the sea. It's the Mediterranean Sea. Of course, you can close this. Next. And the people, they don't want that we put some rideau there. Because they want to be there, they want to speak with the people, they want to have this. Next. And this was inauguration. Then we use outside. We are very close with the seaside. And then this is a very small, this is the smallest building that I did in my life. I am very proud of this because it's not a project only. The title of the Biennale, Less Aesthetics, More Ethics, perhaps comes from this project. It is not enough to be a good architect, to do good project, to be clever, brilliant. I think there is something else, something that is, I don't know, I call this ethics, but could be a lot of things. Could be passion, could be expression, could be emotion. Next. Then there is two lives. The life of the past. We did a restoration of this cemetery. And there are a future that we want to do for the future. Next. Next. Then you see what's up. This is in Arab, always in Israeli, in Hebrew, the Paris Center for Peace. Next. Now this is only 3 minutes, and after I tell you that I love you all. And
in Jaffa, there is a land.
This was the beginning of the project.
Near a beautiful sea,
99.
Of Mediterranean Sea.
I was younger.
See, it is the same colors that we have only in the Mediterranean. Nobody can have the same colors. And this land is a little land that we like very much, we love very much. And this land we start to think the peace center. The peace center is a stratification. It's a stratification of history. It's between stones and glass, stones and glass. And nothing is perfect. Everything is imperfect. At this place, we start to think something like an object, like a lone object, loneless here in this place. But this place was something very near to two people that I used to live in this land since many, many centuries. At this place, we start to have one idea. There's a platform here with somebody that can stay here And this place is like place where you take light in the day inside, and after in the night, this can be like lamps, like beautiful lamps. But this was not enough. One day, this building, this monument, this place takes some beautiful wings. And the wings can bring this building very far. This was the two wings of the peace. And this way, the certification of people that was suffering, many people suffering here, now start to be people that can start to live together. And we like more and more this project, and we want this project can be a beautiful place where you have many platforms that go out and the people can live there with theater, with people that can be office, economy, democracy. They can start to have another way. This we call Peace Center in Jaffa. And the day today is 9999.
Thank you very much.
And this is all.
Well, thank you very much for that very inspirational presentation. I will do the next introduction, and then after that, there will be yet another a discussion up here. Right, okay, good. So our next speaker is Kenneth Frampton, who is a British architect, critic, and historian, and the Ware Professor of Architecture at the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation at Columbia University in New York. Mr. Frampton studied architecture at the Guildford School of Art and the Architectural Association School of Architecture in London. Subsequently, he worked in Israel as well with Middlesex Country Council and Douglas Stephan and Partners, during which time he was also a visiting tutor at the Royal College of Art and the Architectural Association. Mr. Frampton has also taught at Princeton University and the Bartlett School of Architecture in London. He's been a member of the Columbia faculty since 1972, when he also became a fellow of the Institute for Architecture and Urban Studies in New York and the co-founding editor of its magazine, Oppositions. Mr. Frampton is well known for his writing on 20th century architecture, including his books Modern Architecture, A Critical History, which has been reprinted and republished many times, and Studies in Tectonic Culture. In 2002, a collection of his writings was collated and published under the title Labor, Work, and Architecture. He is also the recipient of the Médaille d'Or, the Académie d'Architecture Paris, and the ACSA Topaz Medal for Excellence in Architectural Education. He will be speaking to us this afternoon about background to the middle ground, spirituality as a redeeming paradigm in early modern architecture, 1913 to 27. Is Mr. Frampton here? Thank you.
Thank you. I have to thank, I think I have to thank Carla Britton for inviting me to speak at this event. I say I think because I resisted rather strongly that invitation. I said I don't know anything about the Middle East, or not about the theme of religious sites and urban form. And that's still the case. So I'm also could be counted as something of an interloper, I think, in this situation. But finally, you know, it's a very persuasive woman, and here I am, for better or for worse. And I have to say that I've found it extremely difficult to put a piece together which has a kind of tangential relevance to the basic topic of the two-day symposium. And the consequence of this was that I produced a very long paper, and then I fortunately had a short and sharp early morning talk with my lifelong colleague, Peter Eisenman, who said, you know, we're only supposed to talk for 20 minutes. So I then rapidly decided to cut the paper. So now I have two papers, one short, one long. And I will probably pass a little bit between the two. And of course, the paper by now has a different title. And I will go a little bit into this whole question of the title and where I think I might be going with this somewhat speculative reflection on, certainly on a very intense period during the First World War, and also certain events that precede that and certain events that come after it. But let me at least try to get into the issue. I regret to confess at the outset that this contribution will be at variance with the ostensible topic of the symposium. This is due to ignorance, to the fact that I have no clear idea as to what is the significant relationship today, if any, between monotheistic religious structures in the Middle East and the fabric of the universal megalopolis, which, notwithstanding the traces of the medieval city, is surely as much present in the Middle East as anywhere else. And I think actually what I've heard in the last 2 days tends to testify to that fact rather strongly. Hence the shift of the focus represented by my working title, The Background to the Middle Ground, which is perhaps a rather too facile play on the somewhat cryptic and in a way equally ambiguous title, I think, of the symposium. In the process of preparing for this piece, I wondered whether the middle ground alluded to the possibility of some ultimate political rapprochement in the Middle East, or whether at a pinch the middle ground might, from my somewhat skewed point of view, be construed as being the Middle Ages. And here we're looking, by the way, at a drawing of Bukhara, essentially, you know, the Middle Ages. That is, the pre-industrial, pre-scientific moment when the achievement of the city reached its apotheosis in both the Occident and the Orient, above all at a time when religious structures were organically integrated into the urban fabric, as in the case of these images of Bukhara, first this axionometric, and then a plan drawn by my colleague, late colleague, Klaus Herdig at Columbia, some 20 years ago. By the term background, what I have in mind is the problematic cultural condition brought about by the progressive worldwide impact of modernity and modernization, and by the undermining of traditional faith as a result, by the impact of Cartesian doubt, by the not entirely beneficial triumph of techno-scientific instrumentality, and by the liberative, politically rational challenge of the Enlightenment. The repercussions of this skepticism grew ever more evident in various ways throughout the 19th century, dating in Europe, I think, very decisively from around 1840, and culminating in the prelude and the aftermath of the First World War, most particularly in Germany and Russia. The mutual crisis I have in mind is, of course, first the Russian Revolution of 1917, and second, the repression of the left-wing German Spartacus League in 1919. Working by way of what I think might call historical analogy, and at the considerable risk of unduly widening the agenda of this event, what I want to broach briefly are two seemingly interrelated factors. First, the way in which the loss of traditional faith was accompanied, not so incidentally, by the dissolution of the medieval city, and second, how the avatars of an emergent modernity felt the need throughout the last quarter of the 19th century to develop a new anthropocentric universal religion in order to compensate for the loss of faith. We have intimations of this in the somewhat eccentric invention in the States of theosophy by Madame Blavatsky in 1873, extremely influential on arts throughout the first half of the 20th century. It's a curious fact that when Mondrian died in New York in 1944, the only books found in his studio were 4 books on theosophy. And then in Rudolf Steiner's more culturally systematic transformation of this belief system into his anthroposophical movement of 1913. It is just these proto-modern developments that brought me to focus on what I would like to call the new spirituality, within the context of that particularly, I could say, maybe elegiac moment that was experienced by the German architectural avant-garde between the turbulent years 1914 to 1919. With this, I'm not only evoking Steiner's foundation of anthroposophy, but also the more familiar Bauhaus proclamation of 1919, given under the woodcut image of Lionel Feinegger's The Cathedral of the Future, which was also identified at the time as the Cathedral of Socialism. With regard to this last, we have to acknowledge that spirituality or faith, be it old or new, can never be entirely divorced from the ideology of collective identity and from certain aspirations with regard to the development of society. Hence, my background to the middle ground has two specific themes: the new spirituality and the Cathedral of the Future, as these twin paradigms were to be anticipated initially around 1840 in both England and Germany. Two cultural syndromes that crystallized in Europe in the middle of the 19th century presaged the advent of the new secular spirituality and the rising importance of the cult building. The first of these is A.W.N. Pugin's Gothic revival movement in England, conceived by him as anti-Protestant, anti-panoptic, moralizing force posited with the ostensible aim of turning the clock back to the Catholic harmony of England, supposedly Catholic harmony of England, in the midst of the 15th century, as polemically set forth in his second edition of Contrast, published in 1840. And we're looking here at this ideal world of Christendom in 1840, the stuff of the Gothic revival, of course, the spires, the fortifications of the city, the buttercross, the almshouses on the bottom left-hand corner, the graveyard of this, the graveyard of the church, the buttercross, the almshouses, the walled fortifications, etc. And then there follows, hence the contrast, and it's a contrast between the city of 1840 and 1440, this, where we see, of course, the fortifications have been replaced by mill buildings, the spires of the churches are falling down, they have been replaced by chimney stacks, and perhaps most sinister of all, here in the foreground is Bentham's Panopticon and gasworks, and the almshouses have completely disappeared. In fact, this is a replacement for the almshouse, the workhouse. And interesting, here in this position, we find a cylinder with a vein on top of it, which is in fact a treadmill, so one knows when the rodent human being is inside, working to produce useless energy. And this is the sort of apocalyptic vision of Pugin. And at the end of his life, Pugin will see this kind of project, of course, this hopeless project of turning the clock back as something that's completely absurd and will not survive. And in 1852, he says, no, all is vanity and vexation. The other figure, circa 1840, in fact, more precisely, and this brings me to Peter's presentation of Parsifal, is Richard Wagner. His invention of the music drama as a redeeming total work of art, Gesamtkunstwerk, which he took pains to characterize in two tracks. One is the artwork of the future, and I think this is where the title Cathedral of the Future comes from, and Art and Revolution, because he had participated in the revolution of 1848 in Dresden. In fact, when the Prussians suppress this revolt, he's forced to flee to Switzerland. He's in exile in Switzerland for a decade before there's a kind of he's accepted back into Germany. Wagner saw the new spirituality of the music drama as being closely linked to the liberal Republican bourgeois revolution and to the democratic emancipation of the society that would come into being as a result. Wagner had directly experienced this revolution inasmuch as he'd been involved in the Saxon Revolt of 1849. Wagner's Festival Theatre, realized outside Bayreuth, Bavaria in 1876, was specifically conceived as an ideal setting for the performance of his cathartic music drama. Actually, today we learned it's not so ideal in terms of sightlines, which is very astonishing to me, because I've never been there, I have to confess, but the amazing thing is this play with the architecture, so that the point at which the proscenium is separated from the stage becomes more difficult to perceive. And the other is this strange thing which he called the mystisch Abgrund, the mystic gulf in which the orchestra is in the orchestra pit, and the audience is subjected to the overture, which with this magical music that seems to arise from nowhere. I mean, I think it's kind of already anticipates, as it were, the kind of overwhelming power of the cinema, in fact, because it's also, in a sense, even more seamless. As to the latent intent of the total work of art, Aaron Ridley, in the Encyclopedia of Aesthetics, has characterized the overall aim of Wagner's music drama in the following terms. Nietzsche was probably the first person to put his finger on the wider character of Wagner's artistic ambitions. The aspiration to a totality of vision, to an all-encompassing interpretation whose authority was to be grounded on the primacy of feeling, seemed, on Nietzsche's diagnosis, to be symptomatic less of an artistic impulse than of a religious one. Founders and furtherers of religions, he insisted, set out to combat the dissatisfactions engendered by the immanent, contingent nature of human existence. They do this by inventing transcendental interpretations that, because they offer these to account for everything, make sense of everything. Wagner's aesthetic turns out to be a kind of substitute theology expressly designed to comfort the afflicted and to foreclose the possibility of living in that honest acknowledgement of immanence and contingency that Nietzsche called noble and tragic. Small wonder then that, having made this diagnosis, Nietzsche withdrew his youthful identification of Wagner's art as the birth of tragedy. What is beyond doubt, though, is that in a century in which religion proper had started to lose its grip, art was increasingly seen as its natural successor. Something must comfort the afflicted, and this new cult, which counted Hector Berlioz and Franz Liszt amongst its early adepts, few, including Wagner, seriously doubted that he was intended to be the high priest. He wrote, "When religion becomes artificial, it's the duty of art to save religion's essential core." And when he opened the Festspielhaus at Bayreuth, built by him and specifically designed for the performance of his own works, its character as a temple and a place of worship was widely appreciated. End quote. That is all Ridley, in fact. In any event, it was surely a place of bourgeois pilgrimage, and still is, as Peter instructed us this morning, and even up to the present, although its initial aura as a fount of spirituality is perhaps somewhat faded. It's significant that when it was built, it was totally divorced from the town of Bayreuth, suggesting a kind of inevitable dislocation between the new spirituality. This is the view from the Bayreuth at the time, back towards, from the Festspielhaus back towards Bayreuth, as an inevitable dislocation between the site of a new spiritual temple and the unavoidable dispersal of the traditional city once you deprived it of its walls. All right, so now that's a piece of the long text. Here's a piece of the short text. I'll try and use more short text than long text, and then Bob won't be so nervous about when I'm going to stop all this. All right, okay. Yeah, no, I know. I got the vibe. Yes, I want to argue that all of this finds an echo at around the same time in Germany, in a trajectory which culminates in the Cathedral of the Future via the crucible of Bruno Taut's internationally socialist pacifist imagination. This first makes itself manifest in Taut's famous glass pavilion, erected for the Deutsche Werkbank exhibition in Cologne of 1914. This is the very dandy Taut as a young man, and this is the famous prose poem Glass Architektur by Paul Scherbart. Scherbart, who had indeed been influenced by Rudolf Steiner, part of Herbert Walden's avant-garde circle in Berlin around the publication Der Sturm. And it is in a rather crude translation by Dennis Sharp, with kind of couplets that go, building in brick, does us harm. Colored glass destroys hatred, etc. And Taut, of course, very taken by this. You see, it is the publishing house of De Sturm, 1914. It's the eve of the First World War. And here is 1914 also, is the glass pavilion. I'm sure that to some of you this material is more than familiar, but aside from exhibiting the latest advanced products of the German glass industry, this pavilion was conceived as a model of a cult building, as is indicated by the sequence of circulation. That's to say, by the initial rise to the first floor by radial stairs, plus a descent in 7 stages on either side of a continuous cascading fountain, and exiting at the end through a kaleidoscopic light show as a sort of full. But what is fascinating about that plinth wall is that you see it is published by Taut here, drawing BT 1914. The Gothic cathedral is the prelude or the forerunner of glass architecture. And so, you know, the Taut dedicates the pavilion to Scherbart, and Scherbart dedicates glass architecture to Taut. And here is the cascade and the descent in this cult building. This is actually a reconstruction of the colored ceiling of the cult building made some years ago. Glass pavilion. Here is the actual image, of course, with glass lenses let into the floor. From this platform, you commence the descent. And in this plan, I think you can see how you know, this complex circulation leads to this descent. And here is the light display machine before you exit. And of course, sections and plans. This is the plan of the upper level, a complete set of schematics on the glass pavilion. Taub would elaborate this new spirituality further in 3 books: Alpine Architektur and Die Stadtkrone, City Crown. Both of these are published in 1919. And Die Auflösung der Städte is published in 1920. Thus, in Alpine Architektur, we may read about a schematic map of the Alps conceived as a vast building site, the following. This is, of course, the map of the Alps is here, and this is the text surrounding this very naive image. Yes, impractical and without profit. But has the useful ever made us happy? Profit and even more profit, comfort, convenience, good living, education, knife and fork, railways, water closets, and then guns, bombs, instruments for killing, merely to desire the useful and the comfortable without higher ideals, spells boredom. Boredom brings quarreling, strife and war, lies, robbery, murder, wretchedness, blood flowing from a million wounds. Harness the masses for a gigantic task, a task whose completion can be felt as having a meaning for all. Each man will see his own handiwork clearly in the common achievement. All men will serve one concept, beauty as the image of the earth that bears them. Boredom disappears, and with it strife, politics, and the spectre of war. This is a little taste of Taut's extremely excited, youthful pacifism, following you know, the disaster of the war and the repression of the progressive forces in Berlin in 1919. In Alpine Architektur, Taut follows this plate I've just shown you with this image and the following inscription: crowns on mountains, decorations, valleys transformed, the plateaus around Lake of Lugano built over with graduated glass architecture, aircraft and airships transport their passengers on pleasure trips to find release from sickness and sorrow through the contemplation of their own handiwork. This obsession with the idea that the building would be built by the society as a whole. All right, where am I now in this oscillation? Yeah, I'll do my best. Well, actually, this is a very fascinating image, which is that Europe is shown, of course, with the benefit of daytime, and the romantic East is shown, of course, shrouded in night in this particular image. But he publishes in 1919 this book, The City Crown, and by the City Crown he means, of course, well, this is the first frontispiece in the book. He means the Gothic cathedral. And he will, but he will step outside a kind of Eurocentrism, or try to step outside it. I mean, here the cathedral in Rouen, here, these are all plates from here, the Mao Tse temple in Japan, here the Moscow, the Cathedral of the Kremlin, here Rangoon, the stupa in Rangoon, and at least 2/3 of the book will be not Eurocentric, will be, you can accuse him, of course, very, I think justifiably, of a certain Orientalism, but nevertheless it is an attempt to move out from from that kind of syndrome. 1918 led to the formation of Taut's Arbeitsrat für Kunst, Workers' Council for Art, by which he had hoped one would be able to assume direct governmental power through a series of workers' and soldiers' councils similar to those formed in the Soviets after the revolution. Taut's Architecture program, published in December 1919, and his 1919 manifesto on the Workers' Council for Art, under the wing of a great architecture, directly anticipate the substance of the Bauhaus proclamation, to which we shall shortly turn, as part of the architectural program of the Arbeitsrat für Kunst. Art and people form a new unity. Art shall no longer be the enjoyment of the few, but life and happiness of the masses. The aim is the alliance of the arts under the wing of a great architecture. And then, I think I jumped here, did I? Yeah. And then this is the Cathedral of the Future, the woodcut to which I've already referred. And the astonishing caption underneath it, which many of you have perhaps read, reads as follows. I mean, the end of it. Architects, sculptors, painters, we must all return to the crafts. Bachil would like that, I think. For art is not a profession. There is no essential difference between the artist and the craftsman. The artist is an exalted craftsman. In rare moments of inspiration, transcending the consciousness of his will, the grace of heaven may cause his work to blossom into art, but proficiency in craft is essential to every artist. Therein lies the prime source of creative imagination. Let us then create a new guild of craftsmen. Without the class distinctions that rise an arrogant barrier between craftsmen and artists, together let us desire, conceive, and create the new structure of the future, which will embrace architecture and sculpture and painting in one unity, and which will one day rise towards heaven from the hands of a million workers, like the crystal symbol of a new faith. I mean, already we have this kind of medieval crystal iconography in this very statement, crystal symbol of a new faith. That abstract, radiant idea that is underlying all these images of Taut at this time. With this new spiritual evocation, while this new spiritual evocation was signed by Gropius, the wording echoes the call for a great synthetic work, which Taut had already advanced in an article he published in Der Sturm in 1914. Okay. A bit more. In this publication of 1920, The Disillusion of Cities, Taut features proposals for the redistribution of the population over the countryside, much as Marx had recommended in 1848, even though Taut at that time was far too idealistic and anarchic to align himself with Bolshevism. His vision for the new settlements of the future had much more to do with a radiant interpretation of Howard's Garden City, dating from 1898, influenced by Kropotkin's Factories, Fields and Workshops of the same date. Taut's ideal low-rise cities were planned in the shape of stars with grouped community centers, crystalline houses. Tout of spirituality. Tout was convinced that these cult buildings could not assume the old format because the conventional religion had been totally compromised by the disaster of the First World War. On the other hand, he argued, quote, "It is unthinkable that millions of men will fall prey to materialism, will live on without knowing the reason for their existence. There must be something in each human breast that lifts man above the temporal and makes him feel part of his community, his surroundings, his nation, and all mankind." Tout identified this faith as Sozialgedanke, but he conceived of this as a kind of utopian socialism elevated above conflictual politics. So these are two examples of Tout's adaptation of the Garden City, and this with, each time, of course, a central religious building, the city crown within the fabric. As in medieval cities, of course, the crown had been in the fabric, but he builds none of this, of course, and not this either. And I am coming close to the end of this piece. What I'm showing here is Tout's Haus des Himmels, which is this crystalline structure with a 7-pointed star plan and split into 3, this magic number of 7 and 3, and raised on a podium. And here you see this is one of the communities that are sort of opening out of one side. The whole thing is surrounded by horticultural belt for the cultivation of food. There are sort of sculptural, symbolic totems all over the place, and this is I think, quite fascinating plan that the actual religious building is this 7-pointed star. Then there are courtyards that open onto these kind of collective, specialized collective dwelling areas, split between children, Kinder, and artists, Künstler, and Kunde, the only translation of which I can find is seer or prophet. It's a play, of course, with words, Kinder, Künstler, Kunde. And then each one opens out to a sort of more normal housing complex. I mean, nothing is too normal about this, obviously. And this goes down into sort of community buildings, public buildings that is also equipped with an airport, a railroad, and autoroute. The autoroute, of course, circles all around the horticultural belt. So you can see how it is an adaptation of Howard's ideas, and these one thinks of early Picasso, Cubism, and so on. This kind of, but also, I mean, however naive this appears to be, also completely cancelling, I mean, the monotheistic authority of Eurocentric European culture. The interior of this looks like this, where there is, I suppose, some vague affinities for the Gothic, and this is my last image, because it's a huge jump, of course. It's Jorn Utsen's Opera House in Sydney under construction. I mean, and is clearly not the cathedral of the future. It's not a cathedral at all, except Utsen would see the tectonic form of this building as having very strong affinities for the Gothic. And its placement on the podium with a series of steps leading up to that podium out on Bennelong Point would also obviously be like the kind of preparatory approach to a temple. And it is interesting that it's not a cathedral, it is an opera house. This kind of oscillation, if you like, between the opera house as a new spiritual site Theatre altogether, of course, is connected to, in its origins, to primitive religion. It brings one back to Wagner. I mean, the irony is you couldn't possibly produce a Wagnerian opera here because the site is so narrow that the stage is very restricted. It's always been the case that a full Wagnerian opera could not be realized in the Sydney Opera House. But what is interesting, symbolically speaking, is that Sydney, the city crown, the Cathedral of the Future, was indeed built in Sydney, and that the symbolic function was not only to identify Sydney, but also Australia. It's clear that that Utzon's Opera House functions in relation to Australia in the same way as the Eiffel Tower functions in relation to Paris at the level of a popular symbolic icon. As I said, this fragmented piece, unfinished, still not completely worked through. I mean, I'm grateful to Carla for getting me here, so to speak, because I was compelled to try and develop this idea, and I will try to develop it earlier, this question further, this notion of new spirituality and the dissolution of cities, and the tectonic cult building. I mean, I think this question of tectonic is important. I mean, if I were to develop it further, covering the years 1840 to 1940, I would end with a building, which I don't show here, which sits in the center of Copenhagen, the Grundtvig Church, designed by P.V. Jensen Klint in 1914 and not finished until 1940. Entirely of load-bearing brickwork, no steel, an enormously high building, as someone said, a monument to Danish building capacity. Now, what is fascinating about this, which relates to the Cathedral of the Future and this idea of the workers building the cathedral themselves, this kind of anarcho-socialist notion of that kind of production, not realistic, not any more realistic, I suppose, than Pugin's idea that one could go back to 1440. But what is interesting is that someone like Jensen Klint was self-taught builder, engineer, architect, and called himself master builder. He had total contempt for the title architect, and insisted that architects shouldn't be taught design, they should be taught how to build, and they should look at vernacular, etc., etc., etc. To pagan sites in Denmark and so on, and that this building in Copenhagen, does embody, certain ideas about Danish collectivity, Danish kind of progressive thought at the end of the 19th century and going into the 20th, with regard to education, with regard to the status of women, with regard to the idea of the nation altogether. So what I think is interesting is the way in which the religious building has that capacity to carry this kind of content. And I just want to end with this reflection. When we saw yesterday, recent mosque buildings and not so recent mosque buildings, many of them from the point of view of kind of tectonic integrity were rather weak. And I think that the transcendental spiritual building, symbolic of collective and spiritual political aspirations, as a compensatory redeeming undertaking in the face of a nihilistic technology, a technology that is driven by global capitalism. I mean, we see this perfectly in the kind of situation that Hashim Saikus was describing this morning with regard to Beirut, that this building, the possibility of making such a building has increasing importance, but I think this transcendental quality that I'm talking about has to be dependent on the quality of the architecture, of the way the thing is made. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Professor Frampton, for that very interesting history of spiritual building in a variety of places. Okay, well, our respondent to the two speakers is Professor Bridget Shim, who's going to deliver this response. I see her there. She was born in Kingston, Jamaica. She trained at the University of Waterloo with degrees in environmental studies and architecture. She has been a professor at the John H. Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape, and Design at the University of Toronto since 1988, and a principal of Shim Sutcliffe Architects in Toronto, an architecture and design firm interested in the integration of furniture, architecture, and landscape. Their built architectural work has been honored with 11 Royal Architectural Institute of Canada Governor General's Medals and Awards for Architecture for both public and private projects. She's also received the American Institute of Architects, American Wood Council, Canadian Wood Council, Architectural Record Interiors, and ID Magazine Design Review Awards. In 2002, Bridget Shim and her partner Howard Sutcliffe were recipients of the Toronto Arts Award for Architecture and Design. And in addition to all of her architecture, Professor Shim has been a visiting professor at many universities, including here at Yale, where she was both in 2005 and 2010 the Eero Saarinen visiting professor at Yale, as well as in 2008 the Davenport visiting chair here. She's also been a visitor at Harvard's Graduate School of Design and the University of Michigan. She's currently serving on the Waterfront Toronto and the University of Toronto Design Review Committees. And bringing us tangentially back into the Middle East, in 2007, she was a member of the master jury for the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. And so we invite Professor Bridget Shim to the podium here.
Let me begin by offering thanks to Carla and Dean Stern for really tackling a challenging topic in challenging times. We've heard from a range of brilliant speakers discussing everything from middleness to inventing tradition, the role of history as a lived reality, the redefined role of the architect as intellect, activist, and politician, the role of craft as a symbol of tradition and as material expression of heritage, and the evolving role of the city and everything from its topography, its kind of verticalness, to its flatness. As a visiting professor here, my last two advanced studios have really addressed the evolving role of sacred space and sacred sites. Working directly with my students, we've uncovered the complexity of the physical site and really attempted to delve into the constructed site or constructed identity, as one of the speakers spoke about yesterday. The lessons that my students and I learned was that the same physical site may have very different meanings to different constituent groups. The contested site is often a reconstruction of a cultural identity, quoting again from one of our speakers. The challenging sites, such as Hashim Sarkis's site in Beirut, or the site we just saw in Jaffa, the settlement hilltops in the West Bank, and many of the urban mosques, synagogues, and churches really reflect 21st century issues. Their complexities, their difficulties really make them very fertile territory for the invention of architecture, for spatial ideas and explorations. As a member of the 2007 Aga Khan architecture jury, my eyes were really recalibrated to the enormous difficulties and simultaneously the remarkable opportunities for architecture in the Muslim world. I describe my experience on the jury as really transformative because many of the winning projects provided exemplary models, a place for architecture, a place for the imperative of architecture in terms of building communities and crossing different boundaries, both physical boundaries as well as political boundaries. So really, these complex sites in urban contexts, which is really the focus of the symposium, whether or not they're in the Middle East, whether or not they're religious sites, really serve as a kind of dynamic model for the kind of role for architecture within these very heated political places. As an architect, I'm always engaged in the role of time. And it was really inspiring for me to hear Peter Eisenman talk about the role of time, not only in his own built work, but the kind of question of persistence, perseverance in actually realizing architecture. Several of the talks talked about time as a really potent force, as an element or an actor in the kind of Perez Peace House, the kind of delayed time, the reflection of time, the idea of an instant time, creating instant outposts or marking of place with the territorial buildings in the West Bank, a kind of provisional architecture, kind of compressing time, and in a way the forces of time in such a complex urban construct like Beirut, the building, the rebuilding, the rebuilding of the same city over and over again. So as an educator, I'm really interested in maybe posing a kind of shared question to both of the speakers about what does an architecture student at this point in time take away from this complicated discussion? How does this extended day and a half of quite diverse but also quite poignant papers have any relevancy to architecture students in this particular building who will be shaping our built environment? How do you want architecture students to glean what do you want them to glean from the numerous issues that were really discussed today? For me, the the project that Maximilian Fuchsas presented to us in Jaffa really asserts the role of architecture as a potential force in providing a space for interaction, a place between the city and the sea, between the cemetery and the shoreline, carving out a potential for a dialogue, for a place for dialogue and discussion, with architecture as the kind of shelter or embracing form. At the same time, Ken Frampton's paper really poses the kind of exploration, I would say, framed in a larger context and using Bruno Taut's explorations to his journeys both to the west, to the east, his explorations as an architect to kind of redefine the creative imagination. Through his architecture, he was actually interested in engaging a reshaping of what spiritual space was. And in Ken's own interest in tectonic expression and invention, it leads him to sort of end his paper with a modern building, not a church, not a spiritual building, but an opera hall, maybe a temple to culture. And in a way, in that image, he really talks about the capacity for architecture to posit maybe a new kind of spirituality. And so I think that with that, I would ask both Mr. Fuchsas and Mr. Frampton to join us and to maybe have a sort of short discussion to maybe respond to that a little bit, and then to maybe take one question from the audience. So if we could just do that briefly and before we move on. So thank you for both of your talks, and I guess maybe the question of what would you want, what would the one or two lessons for an architecture student in this school be from your talk?
I think that I can start with something interesting that Frampton touched. Why Hudson, this building, as a church or as something that is more spiritual? Hudson was really intrigued. He was really impressed over the podium of all the monument, but all the temple from Mexico. He came back from Mexico. I did this project. I was student, and I was accepted in his office in the 65. Then he was really impressed with the idea. They said one monument. He was thinking to do a monument. Really, he was absolutely brilliant. Understood that he was doing something very important. He was not at all naive in this way. Taut, I think you are right about Taut. It was sometimes was naive, but he was really concerned with this element.
And this was a podium like all the podium that we can see over the wall. For students, I can speak about, I am at 3 offices now. Then I start with a few people when we start our office in the end of the 60s, beginning of 70s. Then the situation is absolutely different today. We need students, I need the students and the architects. And I want to collaborate with them to do something important, but the schools in Europe, it's very difficult to find a good school. I think this is one of the few one. Bartlett is still a very good school. We try to understand what is a good school. What is a good school? It's a school in which the students have the historical background. I don't think that my professors, my teacher, were Bruno Zevi, that I have to give him a lot of reconnaissance for what he gave me. And after was Paolo Portoghesi, that was fantastic architect, but was very, very clever in that time. When it was in the 60s, he was very, very, very precise, very educated man. And these people, that the historical background is very important, still now.
So is that the lesson? Is that the key for these students?
It's one of the key. The second one is that they have to know what's happening in the world. They have to be involved in social, in culture, in theater, in cinema, in politics, in the fighting. They have to fight for something. They have to give to the other something. They say, I don't want to receive, I want to give. This is, I think, what is very important to have someone that is very strong with you, with us.
Well, I mean, I agree with much of that. I mean, I think that I didn't know you worked for Utzon. I mean, I think that yesterday.
I was a student.
Yes, well, yesterday, I mean, there was this point made about that architects should have 3 aspects which are often not present: intellectual development, capacity for action, and political involvement. And I think that is, should be consciously encouraged inside schools of architecture, I think. And political involvement, I think, I mean, to really be concerned about the interface of culture and politics, over the wide range of the society. And I think that is, well, very much part of, has been, it's latent in all the papers that, more than latent in all the papers that have been contributed to the symposium, I think. But the other thing which I wanted to add to Fuchs's was this, this play in this, the non-Eurocentric preoccupations of Utzon. I mean, he was looking all the time to Mexico or to China or to India or Japan. He was trying to escape from this Eurocentric imperial, colonial trap, and was looking, and also I think very interesting is this play between the fact that you have to make an earthwork, the building has to go into the ground, it is the beginning of the idea of a podium, and you have to put a roof over it, this dialogue between roofwork, earthwork. I mean, I think very fundamental, I still, of course, I'm proselytizing, I'm totally convinced by that discourse of his, and I think it is something to be taken out of, him, and I think is of relevance to the question of cult building. I use this term cult building because I'm trying to escape. I mean, I did use, of course, this cathedral business, but it's a mosque or some Buddhist temple, I don't know, this building which in its organic fullness at some point was also a public building. Well, people have made that point also, that the mosque was not just a place of religious rite, but was a place of public discourse. It played a public role in the society. And I remember the first time I became aware of the fact that in the medieval period, the market moved from the parvis outside the cathedral into the body of the cathedral. You know, so you bought and sold goods in the cathedral itself. You know, so that sense of the. But I think the way such a building is made, I mean, I think it applies to the Peace Center. The intensity of the way the building is put together is an essential part of the professional role of the architect. And one last point, which is, I think, you know, we are really kidding ourselves if we think that something can be done with, you know, the megalopolis. I mean, give me a break, you know. It is just going on forever, exploding forever, you know. I mean, architects, they can't do anything with it at all, you know. And what one can do is to make interventions, and amongst those interventions, I think, are spiritual, quote, public buildings.
Thank you.
Can we take one question from the audience, if there's, is there one there?
Someone there.
Yeah.
My question is to Ken.
Do you have a mic?
It's a bit philosophical, a bit wide-ranging, presumptuous, but you're responsible for it with your notes here.
Yes. All right.
In this search for new spirituality, is it possible to actually see in that something similar to the development of European philosophy from Kant to Nietzsche, the anxiety of having sort of like rejected an old framework of interpretation, if you want, and looking for a new one? And the newness is the reason for an anxiety of not being able to really detach oneself from where one is coming, either architecturally or formally or philosophically. And can one deduce from what you have given us in here that it is possible to read in the failure of finding new forms in the architecture, in the religious architecture in the Middle East, the absence of this search for something new, rather it's an attempt at recuperating something old, and not really sort of like rejecting and philosophically searching for a new spirituality, rather digging out an old spirituality. I mean, this is a question that is quite widely discussed in Islamic theological circles now, and I wonder if you could see parallels.
Well, I don't know enough, of course, you know, about the Islamic world, so makes it difficult to respond. But I was going back to Bruno Taut, which I didn't mention. You know, there is an influence of medieval German mysticism on Taut. Meister Eckhart and Jakob Bohm, you know, and I was staggered to see that the concept of nix, nothing, was the way in which Eckhart, if I understood correctly, identified the Godhead. And then I suddenly thought, mis, benaha nix, almost nothing. I mean, and I think that one of the amazing things about mis is this, as opposed to a more facile minimalism, is this kind of intensity with which the light and the fabric is not in all works, but in the best works, handled so that it has a sort of presence and resonance of this, in the end, mystical nothing, you know. I mean, I think it relates, to my view, to this also medieval idea, but this idea of crystal, you know, of light. I mean, that it itself can be seen as the embodiment of a new spirituality. That's the only way it amazes me that Mises Almost Nothing is a reference back to Taut, the Meister Eckhart.
I have a question for Mr. Foxas. I was wondering where that piece of land came from on the sea and who was it owned by, and if you had struggled over ethical issues of the land.
I forgot to tell before, because it's the first time that I speak about this building, because I have very big emotion when I speak about this building, because it was 10 years of my life, not only.
Was very important for me. Then Shimon Peres said something interesting. He said, no government donors, only private donors. We buy the land, but the land belonged to the government of the city, because it was the manium. The manium is English.
The Bij, you mean the Bij?
It belonged to the city.
Oh, yes, yes,
Tel
yes.
Aviv.
Of Jaffa, Jaffa,
Municipality.
Jaffa.
Yeah, Jaffa is a municipality.
Yeah.
But all the land that is between 300 meters belong to the government. And then you can buy. And they decide to buy B2, to pay. This area was no man land. It was, the property was the government, the state, public. Then we buy this, and we did all the procedures to buy, to pay, and after we had no enough money, and we did also the permit to build. The Peres Center decided to do a normal procedure and not extravagant procedure. This was in the ethic way of because the two persons that were engaged in this was the two guys that was very young, and they helped Shimon Peres in Oslo treat. Then they were very, very intensively, really, really engaged in this. Then I could not, the first idea was to do this with, you have seen, with Arafat. I had the picture to test this. But was not possible because he didn't accept it 1 year after with the Barak to find an agreement. He said no. It was, we lost time and people died, etc. Then after this, we moved from a Palestinian area that we want to do with them there in the Palestinian area. We want to give to the Palestinians the maximum of responsibility. And we were to looking for, I remember I was with Shimon Peres and the minister of Palestinian. We were in Tulkarem. It's not far from, but this belonged to the Palestinian Arabs area. And then there was something very crazy in this project because I was with one Israeli architect that was with me, and he had 40 years old, and I used to be once in a year to do one mount for army in the army. Once he called me and said, the mayor, the every people that we met, we had a dinner together, very happy, in 99 in Turkey. Now I am here, he called me, I am here, they shot me, he was a military there, and they were fighting. Then I think the land was not Palestinian, but it could not be Palestinian. If we want to be in Arabs area, and the only one Arab area was Jaffa. Because we have in the board, there are one director is Arab, one director is Israeli. They have two offices that they watch the sea. They're exactly the same office.
Thank you. I think we can take one more question, and that's it for our break.
I would like to just follow up on that question and just to talk about the way you portrayed Jaffa, because I think... Is it on? Yeah. I mean, you portrayed Jaffa on one hand as an ancient story, and then you went directly from there to the map and a physical site, and you didn't really talk about a social or historical context as to what Jaffa is. And I think this question is coming from a perspective where every piece of land in Tel Aviv and Jaffa has a very painful history, I think, and memory to it. So, I mean, my question to you is, have you looked at the recent history of Jaffa and this site And I mean, you portrayed it as a mixed Arab Jewish town, but in fact, Jaffa's actual original Arab residents are in refugee camps now. So these are issues that I think come up with the site and with its history. And I didn't really hear you talk about any of it, so I'm just wondering if you had anything to say.
Jaffa is, Tel Aviv is very recently. We know everybody. And Jaffa was really the site. Jaffa was not very important. It's only the history is important of Jaffa. One harbor, at Jerusalem, and Jaffa. But this was the connection. Jaffa, I have to tell you something, that I am really upset because the bourgeoisie, the Arab bourgeoisie, are destroying Jaffa in this period. If you go there, you find some beautiful buildings that the Arab bourgeoisie, they are destroying to do something very, very, very Emirates, very Baroque, very, very bad taste, because they want to show that they don't like the history. They are not really interested in the history. They want to show something else that is money, power. There is a big family there that is very powerful. There are now more and more land, more and more housing. And it is not a fantastic story, this. But we have to know that we have to always to fight for preservation, for something like this. But it's very difficult in Jaffa to come inside of Arabs' questions, even its culture problem. Jaffa is I told you, is the oldest harbor in the history of the man, of a human being. You can see all the crossroads, you can see the castle that was crossed, destroyed, they are destroyed. But you feel that I show you something about Andromeda. Why? Because I discovered after. I could not imagine all this mythology, history. You can imagine something. After you discover this place, you feel something for this place. When Shimon Peres said, come to see the site, you will cry, the site was speaking, was doing something. The site is important because it's important. Why? You don't know, but you feel, and after you know. I think that is Jaffa is really a problematic question. And I think we are there because I am very happy the people inside. I cannot be now romantic or neo-romantic, but when you see there are a team of football, there are some kids, Arabs, and kids is there, they play in the same team, or they are working together, or they are making some oils, olive oils, or something more. They are fighting against the wall. And they are against the wall.
So thank you so much to both Ken and Maximilius for two very provocative talks, and we really appreciate your contribution. Thank you.
We will take a quick 5-minute break and then reconvene for the final session of this symposium.